Hello everyone, welcome to day 4 of our 30 days of code, and today we are going to be creating a responsive color palette. What makes today's project distinct, what makes it unique, what makes it special is the fact that today this color palette that we are about to create is going to be responsive, in the sense that whenever you hover your mouse above it, it's going to enlarge, or its size is going to increase. Also, whenever you minimize your screen, it is going to automatically realign itself in accordance with the size of your screen. So today's project is going to be responsive in the sense that it's going to automatically resize itself to fit in to the size of your screen. Okay, let's dive right in. Let's start building. Let's start creating. Let's continue learning. I'm opening my VS Code now. Okay, so my VS Code is now opened. I'm going to click on open folder. So I want to open, my folder is on my desktop, and I have my 30 days of code. Okay, since I've opened my folder, I'm closing this icon. So now I'm going to create a new folder. That will be for our day 4. And in this day 4, I want to create 2 different files. The first one will be index.html. Index.html. And then I also want to create another file with style.css. Style.css. So in my HTML file, very good. So now I want to go live. So whatever I'm doing, you'll be able to see in my web page. Very good. So now we have an empty web page. Let's start building. So the first thing I'm going to do now, I want to change the title of this web page. I'm going to change the title to responsive web page. Responsive web page. No. Responsive color palette. So the next thing is to link my CSS to my HTML. Style.css. Okay, now that we have successfully linked our CSS to our HTML file, let's start building. So today's project, I'm going to create an header. So this header will contain our topic. So in the header, I want to create an H1 element. Today's one element should be responsive color palette. So that will be the title of our project. So that's for the header. Then apart from the header, I want to create a div. So now what I want to do now is that I want our color palette to be inside a div known as palette. Then I want this palette to also be inside another div known as the palette container. So the first thing I'm going to create now is the div whose class is going to be palette container. So to create that, palette container. So I want this palette container to contain another div known as palette. Then I want my different colors to be in this. So the first color that we'll be working with, let's start working with red. Oh, sorry. Let me minimize this so you can see what I'm doing on my screen. I'm trying to readjust the length of the screen. Very good. So we have the title. So the first color is red. Let's style this. Let's give it a background color of red. Good. That's great. Okay. So let me just copy this and paste it 15 times. That's Control C. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I can just copy this 5 and paste it 3 times. Control C. Okay. So the first color is red. Let's change the second color to orange. Next one, yellow. Next one, green. Next one, blue. Notice that immediately I'm changing it in the HTML, it is also changing in the what? It is also changing in my web page. You can see the color as the color is changing. So the next color is going to be indigo. And the next one is going to be violet. So let me copy and paste this 3 times. I'm going to have the Control C, Control V. Very good. So now we have our various color. Let me maximize the screen so you can see what we have just done. We just created separate divs with different colors. So currently everything looks like a list. It is we have them on top of each other, but I don't really want it to be like this. I want it to be a little bit attractive. I want it to be colorful. I want to add more designs to it. So that means now that we are done with our HTML, we'll be moving on to our CSS. So we are going to style all this. So all this, both the color and the header, the divs, they are all under the body. So I'll start with designing of the body. So now I want the body to have a display of flex. Notice that when I set the display to flex, I have this change. Formerly, before the display to flex, this is how we have it. But after changing the display to flex, the coloration, the divs, no longer occupy all the spaces. Instead, the div and the header are now arranged side by side because the display is now set to flex. So after setting the display to flex, I want to set the flex direction. I want the flex direction to be set to column. Notice that immediately after setting the flex direction to column, the divs they revert back to their original position, because now I don't want to set it row by row. Instead, I want to arrange it column by column. So I just set the flex direction to column. After setting the first direction to column, the next thing to do is to set the align items. Align items, I'm setting that to center. Very good. So with the align item to center, everything and is now set to the center of my what? Of my screen. Both the different colors and the header, they are now set to the center of the screen. Another thing I want to do here is that I want to choose a minimum width. And I will set my minimum width to be 100 VH, that is the full screen. So I want the minimum width to be the full screen. Okay, there are a lot of other designs that I'm going to do to this body, but for now, let's move on to the main topic of the day, that is the color. Yeah, let me start styling my color one after the other. So in order to style this color, I want the color to have a display of grid. Sorry. The colors are contained under the palette. So what I'll be designing now is the palette. Because according to my HTML, all the colors are under the palette. So if I want to change the alignments of the colors, I have to change the alignments of the palette. So now I'll move on to palette. So I want to change the display of the palette to grid. Then I want to change the grid template column to repeat 5 times with the same size. Notice that when I change the grid template column, the colors have now moved from the list. They are now in a grid form. But this grid form looks a little bit jam-packed. So I want to add some spacing in between them. So I'll be changing the gap to 15 px. So with this gap of 15 px, my grid or my colors now have spaces in between them. So this looks a little bit nice. This looks good. But we are not done yet. We are just getting started. I want to separate my colors from the body. And one of the ways I did that is by placing all the palettes into the palettes container. So with this palettes container, I can easily design the color without affecting the whole body. So that is what I'm going to do right about now, because now I'm going to move on to the color palette or palettes container. Palette container. And this palette container, I want to set the width to be 100%. Very good. So with a width of 100%, the palette container cannot take up the whole space. But even with this width of 100%, I want to set the max width to be 1200 pixels. So it will not exceed this 1200 pixels. The next thing is to add the padding to it. I want to add the padding of 30px. Let's see what that looks like. So I just added the padding of 30 pixels. So we now have it in the left, the right, top, and bottom. But we can't see this. To make it obvious, I'm going to add some background colors to it. So I add the background. And then I'm going to pick brown. But I'm going to redesign this brown to some X coloration. So it's going to be a little bit light. Very good. So I just did that. So with this background color, you can obviously see the palette container, the way it's contained. So I want it to be a little bit attractive. So instead of having these sharp edges, I'm going to make the edges a little bit round. So that would be border radius. I'm going to add some border radius to it. So let me make this border radius 30 pixel. 30 pixel. So with a border radius of 30 pixel, the edges are now a little bit round. They are not sharp edges anymore. Instead, we now have these round spherical edges. That's looking good. It's looking great. So we have the border radius palette. So the next thing we want to do now is that we want to move on to the colors. So we want to redesign our colors, we want to make them bigger, we want to make them more attractive, and most importantly, we want to add our over effects later. So to start with the colors, I'll select the class of colors. To select a class, you have to precede it with dots or full stop. So that has to be full stop color. So I want to set the size of this color, that is the height. I want to set the height to 0. When I set the height to 0, it appears as if all my colors are gone. The only thing I have left is just the name or just the text, but they are still there. In order to make them obvious, I'm going to set a padding bottom. Because I want to have a perfect square shape, I'm going to have a padding bottom, and this padding bottom I'm going to set it to 100%. Wow, you see what we have now? By setting the padding bottom to 100%, we now have these great looking spherical colors. So now we have our color palette. But we can make this a little bit more attractive because we have some sharp edges over here. We can change the sharp edges to curved edges to make them more attractive. Also, my text are arranged at the top left corner. I can actually bring them to the center. So that's what I'm going to do right about now. So the first thing I want to do, I want to set the border radius. Let me set the border radius to 20 pixel. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that looks a little bit too much. Let me change it to 15. Good. We have the border radius of 15 px. The next thing we want to do is that we want to move the text to the middle. So now to move the text to the middle, I'm going to start with display. I'll change the display of the color to flex. That is also enable us to be able to move the text to the side or to the section that we want. So the display, I'll change display to flex. After changing display to flex, I want to align the items, but right now I will align content. I want to align the content to the center. Very good. And after that, I'll justify content to the center. Good. So with this align content and justify content, I've been able to move the text from the top left to the what? To the middle. So another thing I want to do now is that I want to add some shadow to my text and to my box. So they look a little bit more attractive, so they look more readable, so they look more legible. So the first thing I want to add text shadow. So the text shadow, vertically, I want it to be 0. Horizontally, let me make it 2 pixel. Then how thick do I want it to be? Let me make that to be 5 pixel. Good. So we can see that we now have our shadow on our text. Our text now have a shadow. So let me add some colorations to that. That will be RGBA. That's what the red, green, blue, and so I want to make it 0, 0, 0, then 0.3. So we just added some shadows to our text using that. Our text now have their own shadow. It's not looking that obvious. Now to make it obvious, I'm going to change the font weight. Let me change the font weight to bold. So when it is bold, it is more obvious. Very good. So now I have some bold text with shadows. So the next thing I'm about to do now is that I want to give my box some shadows also. So that would be box shadow. Let me spell that correctly. So now I now have a box shadow. So this box shadow also, vertically I want the shadow to be 0. Horizontally, let me make it 5px. Then how thick should it be? The opacity should be 10px. Then the coloration, zero, 5px, then 10px. Wow. So let me maximize this. So you can see that my box now have a shadow as the base. My box now have a shadow. This is good. This is great. Let me add some colorations to that also. That will be RGBA. So let me make this 0, 0, 0. Then how thick should it be? Let's make that 0.5. Let's make it 0.5. So that is that for my text. That is that for my box shadow. The next thing that I'm about to do now, I want to add some transitions to it, so that whenever we hover our mouse on these colors, I want there to be a change in size. I want it to maximize whenever we whenever we hover around it. So to do that, first of all, I'm going to have transition, and my transition will be equal to transform. So I want it to transform after 0.3 seconds with ease. And not just that, I also want to change my box shadow anytime we hover above these colors. So to change my box shadows, that will be box shadow after 0.3 seconds with ease. Good. So let's start. So in order to add the over effects, I will select the class of color. Then want to hover around them. So hovering around these colors, I want to change the transform. Whenever I hover around it, I want it to transform on a scale of 1.5. I want it to transform on a scale of 1.5. So what would I do? Notice, let me maximize this. So anytime we hover above it now, you can see, wow. So the boxes are now what? They are now increasing in size. But this 1.5 looks a little bit too much. Let me change that to 1.1. Let's see what we have. What if it is just 1.1? Good. This is okay. So when I change the over effects to 1.1, the screen now, what the colors, they increase in size whenever we hover above them. Another thing I'm going to add now after the transform, I want to change the shadow also. So the box shadow, I want the shadow to deepen whenever we hover around it to make it more obvious and conspicuous. So instead of me having 0, 5, 10, let me change that to 0, 10, and 15 pixel. Good. 0, 10, 15 pixel. And then let's change the coloration to be 0, 0. So the first 0 is for the vertical, second 0 is for the horizontal, then next one 0. And then how thick should it be? Let's make it 0.9. 0.9. Let me maximize my screen so you can see it correctly. So very good. So this is what we have now. This is what we have. So whenever we hover around it, the colors they change in size. Also, the box shadow also deepens. So in order to combine all this together, I'm going to use my Z index function. So with the Z index, I'm going to have 2, a Z index of 2. So what do we have now? Very good. So we have just successfully implemented our over effects to this beautiful color palette. So our color palette is now responsive, and it is responding anytime we hover around it. Now, one thing I want you to notice is that currently we have 5 colors arranged in a column. If I minimize my screen, we have 5. If I make it smaller, we still have 5. If I make it even much more smaller, we still have 5 colors. That means this web page is skewing my color palette. I don't want it to skew my web palette. I want my web palette to at least maintain some level of boldness. So what do? I'm going to add some media queries to it, so that anytime I reduce the size of my web page, my color palette will rearrange themselves to fit into the size of the web page. Instead of skewing them or instead of minimizing them, I want it to be arranged according to the size of the screen. So how do we do that? We can do that by adding some media queries to this color palette. So the first media query that I'll be adding as media is if the max width is equal to 900, whenever the max width is equal to 900, I want my palette to change its size. If the max width is equal to 900 pixels, I want the palette to change its size, and I want the size of the palette to be the grid templates column. So instead of arranging 5 in a column, I want to rearrange it, so it's going to repeat 4 in a column with the same size for each. Notice that when I have my full screen, I have 5 palettes. But whenever I now reduce the size of my screen, I now have how many palettes? I now have 4 palettes. If I'm to maximize this screen, I have 5 palettes. If I'm to reduce the size of this screen, I have 4 palettes. Now what happens when I reduce this size of this screen much more? I still have 4 palettes. No, I don't want it to look like that. So whenever we reduce the size of the screen below 900 pixels, I want another effect to take place. So that means I'll be adding another media query to it. That will be media. So when the max width is now equals to 700 pixels, I want the palette to change its gradient arrangement. So instead of having a grid of 4 per column, I want to change it to a grid of 3 per column. That will be grid template columns, and I want the columns to be 3 in a column, and I want everything to be the same size, 1 FR. So what do we have now? Very good. Very good. Let's take it from the scratch. When we have the full screen, we have five colors per column. We have five colors per column. When we reduce the size of the screen, we have 4 colors per column. When we reduce the size of the screen even further, we are now going to have 3 colors per column. 3 colors per what? 3 colors per column. Okay, what happens when you reduce it even much more further? You still have 3 colors per column. So I'm going to readjust this now so that whenever you decrease the size of the screen even further, I want it to change from 3 to 2. So that will be as media. So I want the max width. Max width, when the size of the screen is less than 500 pixels, I want the palette to change its size to 2 colors per column. That will be grid templates columns. Grid templates columns. Repeat. 2 colors per column. Everything should be of the same size. And that is what we have right about now. So on the full screen, we have 5 colors per column. When we minimize the screen, we have 4 colors. When you minimize further, you have 3 columns. And when you minimize even further, you now have 2 colors per column. We now have 2 colors per column. Another thing I would like to add is I want there to be a change in this header also whenever we are changing the size of the columns. But to do that, I have to go back to my... Okay, so now what have we done just now? We have created the responsive color palette. Whenever we hover around this color palette, the size changes, it maximizes, it increases in size. And whenever we change the size of our screen, the color palette is also responsive in the sense that it rearranges itself to fit the size of our screen from 2 per column to 3 per column, 4 per column, and then on the full screen we have 5 per column. Let's make this so much more attractive. Oh, sorry about that. Now we are going to make this much more attractive by designing the body. Yeah. So this is day 4. Oh. Okay, thank you. So I've just recovered that. So the next thing I want to do now is I want to design the body of this. So let's start with designing the header. So we also want this header to have a width of 100%. a width of 100%. What does that look like? This looks like this. But we don't want this header to exceed the size of 800 pixels. That will be max width. So the max width should be 800 what? 800 pixels. So this is what we have. And then once we move it to the center, that will be text align center. Text align center. Very good. So what do we have now? We now have our header at the center. So let's add some padding and margin to that. Let's add some padding. Some padding of 30px and 20 pixel. So what does that look like? This is what it looks like. Okay. Now let's move on to our H1 after doing that. So for the H1, the major thing I want to do on the H1 is I want to change the color. So let me change the background color. I'll make it linear gradient. Linear gradient. So this linear gradient, I want to move it from the right, or let's say to right. I want it to have a color of blue, red, and blue. Blue, red, and then blue. Okay, let me touch this up a little bit. This blue. This red. Then this blue. So to make it lighter. So I'm not done with this. Moving on with this. Now we are going to use something known as WebKit. So the first thing I will be using is the WebKit text field color. So the WebKit text field color, I want to set it to transparent. Wow, look at what that looks like. It's covered my text. I can't see my header anymore. But just around that, then I'm going to add another WebKit background clip. WebKit background clip, I'll set that to text. Wow, look at what we have now. So we just now have our responsive color palette. So the next thing is our body. Let's move on to the body. Let me change the font family to area. Let me pick the area vertical sans serif. Okay. Okay. So after doing this, let me set the background color to be gradients also. So the background color, I'm setting it to linear gradients. So this linear gradients, let's make it. I have to put a beautiful color from here. Let's make it violet, indigo, and red. Let's make it violet, indigo, and then red. Let's see what that looks like. Let me move on to my palette container. Let me add some backdrops to this. Okay, let me maximize that. Let me change the font width. Font width. Font width. Bold. Then for the colors, let me change the fonts. Oh, oh, color. That's not working. Okay. I still want to change the color of this palette container. Very good. Very good. Okay, this looks a little bit small. Okay. Okay, good. This is great. So what have we done today? Today, we use our HTML to create the structure of our responsive color palette, where we created an header that contains the topic of today's project, which is a responsive color palette. We arrange all our colors into a div of class palette, and then we place everything into another div of palette container. Then using the CSS, we were able to design and add some decorations to our color palette. So now we now have a responsive color palette that increases in size anytime you hover. So it's increased in size together with project is that whenever we decrease the size of our screen, the amount of columns we arrange to fit the size of the screen. For now, we have 5 columns. If you minimize it, we have 4 columns. If you minimize it even further, we have 3 columns. And when we minimize much more further, we have just 2 columns remaining. So today we were able to create this responsive color palette using HTML and CSS. I look forward to having you in our upcoming sessions as we dive in deeper to creating more responsive web pages. Thank you so much. Welcome to Tech with Wex.